Thank you, Linda. Thanks, Linda. I'd like to welcome everybody to Crop Talk for May the 28th. And today we're going to go over a few things, some things that have been in the news lately, and then a couple other items that I've been working on the past week. For the crops update, I was going to give a little bit of crops update, and then been getting a lot of questions about broadcast seeding in the last couple of days, so I figured I would add that to the agenda today and go through a few slides of some of the things that we've done in past years when we got wet conditions like we've got right now and producers were looking at broadcast seeding, so I put in a few of those slides. We have John Gavloski with us today, and he's going to talk about Swede, Midge, and kind of update it as to how it pertains to Manitoba canola growers, and I guess the issues, if there's any issues for this coming year. And then we've received a new registration for authority in soybeans, so Brad Ewankiw from FMC, who handled the product, is here today, and he'll be able to give us an update on use of the product in soybeans and where it could be used, I guess, to producers' advantage to get better weed control. So that's kind of the agenda for today. And we might as well get going and start with the crops update. And I guess just to start off, we've been getting some storms and rain events over the past few days, more to the south of us. There was a hailstorm there just the other night, Monday night in Melita. With that, there was reports of rainfall from anywhere from a ½ inch to as high as even 2 inches now, I'm hearing. So depending on where you were in that system, it was the same one that went through the northern parts of the states that where the tornado issues came out of as well. So rainfall events have definitely been happening on the weekend. North of Boissevain in the Deloraine area, they received high amounts of rainfall. So we've got several areas that are experiencing wet conditions right now, and producers are having a real tough time getting out into the field in the southwest here and to get the crop in. So seeding update right now for the southwest here. We're looking at about 15 to 30% complete of our cereal crops, and that's changing rapidly every day as producers can get back on the land. They're getting stuff in and getting it in fast. And canola, we're in about that 10 or 15%. Last few days, been getting lots of calls regarding soybeans and producers wanting to know if timing-wise and what's their options for still trying to get the soybeans in. And you know, just a heads up there, the 30th of May is the deadline for crop insurance for getting full coverage through crop insurance. So got a couple days left there. So we're running out of time fast with soybeans, but you know, there's still a lot of guys trying to get them in. Like I had mentioned, the cropping definitely varies from area to area, and basically what it is producers are picking dry fields and basically changing from wheat to barley to canola, whatever they were planned for those fields, just to get them in. We are starting to get a lot of calls regarding producers rethinking their seeding plans. Soybean acres are probably going to go down. I know the last couple of days I've been talking to guys and they've been asking about storing seed and all the other options for soybeans for if they don't get them planted. I did mention about the broadcasting of seeding of canola is being looked at, and also getting calls regarding other crops, and I'll talk about that later on here. And more talk about cereal crops going in, and that usually is what happens when we get later in the year. There's more talk about wheat and barley. So that's kind of the situation for the seeding in the southwest. Soils have warmed up a lot, so that's a real good thing, I guess, because what it's doing is it doesn't take long for that seed to germinate after it gets in the ground. So after planting, probably 3 to 4 days is the window you have before that seed is germinated, and depending on how deep it is, some of it is even starting to pop out of the ground within that time period. So emergence is going to be fast, and I guess one of the cautions with fast emergence is we're getting a lot of aggressively growing weeds out there right now, and these pictures were just taken the other day, and you can see cleavers getting fairly big, and pretty much every weed out there is growing already. Volunteer canola, dandelions, we've got grassy weeds all over the place, and it's really important to try to get that burn off done, otherwise there's going to be a lot of in-crop issues later on. So I guess with that fast germination of seed, make sure that you're still planning or getting your burn off done, so you've got that 3 to 4 day window probably after planting, or if you don't get it done before planting. Put this up every week, and this is basically our rainfall and growing degree days and corn heat units since May 1st, and as you can see, we're still most areas are still above 100% of the normal rainfall. We definitely can pick out areas that have been getting well more than their share, and you got the Manitoba area and some of the areas just north of Brandon. I would imagine these numbers only go to the 25th here, so they didn't include a lot of the rainfall events that may have happened over the weekend as well as this past week. So again, we're going to be a lot higher, are moving up on the percentage of normal. Heat units and growing degree days, we are still below average, and we have caught up a fair bit over the last little bit here because had some warm days, and we can see that's probably going to be improving over the next little while here because our highs are definitely, I guess, averaged above average right now. So where do we sit for in corn heat units? We're anywhere from 70 to 80% of normal. So again, we're behind, a little bit behind right now, and then probably the wet conditions are probably one of the main reasons for that. When you look at our precipitation, we're anywhere from 125 to 150% of normal. So we're definitely in that area where basically explains what the wet conditions we've been having and the problems producers have been having getting crop in. And I guess one of the things too is we did go into fall with fairly good moisture conditions, and we had a decent snow cover, and with all that we just haven't had a chance for any of the soil to dry up, and it seems the lower layers of the soil, you get below that 4 to 6 inches, and it's almost like a mud down there, and we just haven't had a chance for a lot of the soil to dry up enough. And I think that's some of the problems producers are having. They get out in the field with the big equipment and they're just not able to pull it. This is just a map that Mike usually shows us when he's on telling us our long-range forecast. And when you look at this map, it's from May the 28th to June the 4th. You can see that there's a fairly wide range of low pressure areas that are going to be coming through Manitoba again. And when you look tomorrow, they're calling for scattered showers. Friday, not a bad day again. Saturday looks like drizzle again, and then Sunday partly cloudy. So the chances of moisture or receiving more moisture over the next little while here is definitely there, and I think that's why we're starting to get a lot more questions regarding the broadcast seeding and some of the do's and don'ts with trying to plant soybeans. Just a little bit of an update on some of the fields we've been watching, and here's the winter wheat field in the Bertle area. As you can see, the moisture doesn't seem to have affected it too much, and actually it's starting to bounce up pretty good and starting to cover the ground, so the crop is looking really good. And Elmer found this field the other day. There was a producer up in the Sandy Lake area that dormant seeded some carberry wheat, and looks like it actually made it through the winter not too bad, and it looks like they're going to leave this, I think it's 30 to 40 acres, so we'll maybe keep an eye on this field throughout the growing season just to see how well it has done. But they basically planted this wheat last fall into cold frozen ground, and we're just hoping for it to germinate this spring, and so far it's not looking too bad. I think they have to work up some of it but they are going to leave some of it. So I'll get into a little bit about the broadcasting tips, and I'm going to just spend a few minutes on some of these slides here. I guess one of the first things, if you're going to look at broadcasting, and I think if most of it is going to be canola, if producers are going to do it. Usually if you're going to broadcast canola, the recommendation is maybe to increase your seeding rate a little bit, and that'll help to account for losses due to poor seed soil contact. You're not going to be getting as uniform of a planting as you would with an air seeder. The seed doesn't make good soil seed contact, so in some cases if you don't get a rain to help it germinate, it won't germinate. Also, if you're going to harrow afterwards, depending on your soil type and how hard or soft the soil is, you could get some of the seed buried deeper than normal, and you could be putting some seed down to 2 inches and other seed barely getting it covered. So again, there'll be a lot of variable issues going on with your seeding depth if you harrow after, or if you do get a chance to harrow it after. Rainfall is important afterwards, because if the seed is on the soil surface, you'll need the rain to get it going. And I guess on average, normally when we broadcast, we do get weaker stands, poorer stands, and we do usually have some increase in problems with some weeds and weed populations. So that'll be something you'll need to be keeping an eye on. Here's a picture that I took a few years ago, and it showed seed that was broadcasted, and you can see that you know, the seed definitely does germinate if the moisture, or there's enough moisture for it to germinate. I guess one of the things you'll notice is that a lot of the root system is fairly shallow, and basically on the soil surface is kind of let it work its way into the ground. And with that, you're going to get weaker standability of the plant, and usually with any type of winds or heavy rain events, we'll usually see those crops tend to lodge a lot quicker than if they were planted into normal conditions. A few tips about fertilizer, and if you're going to be broadcasting, you know, maybe producers will be looking at, in a lot of those cases, producers don't have fertilizer on those fields, so you might be looking at adjusting your fertilizer practices as well. If you're broadcasting fertilizer with the seed, be aware that putting phosphorus on a broadcast method is not a very efficient way of using phosphate. Phosphate doesn't move well in the soil, and what will happen is you probably aren't going to get, well, you won't get the full advantage of that phosphate. So if you have a soil test, you might be able to get away without the phosphate. If you need phosphate, again, you're not going to be using it very efficiently if you broadcast. With nitrogen, there's a greater risk of denitrification on saturated soils, especially if we get hot, windy days, so you'll be losing some of that fertilizer to the atmosphere. The other thing, too, is if we're going to be broadcasting, you know, adjusting your fertilizer rates accordingly, because we're also getting later in the year and maybe our target yields aren't going to be as high as they would have been if we would be sowing in the middle of May or third week of May with under good seeding conditions. If you are, and some of the dealers with the high boys or the floater vehicles will be able to broadcast a lot of fertilizer, or do a lot of seeding in a short period of time, and in a lot of those cases they're blending fertilizer with the seed. If you're doing that, try to get the seed put on and seed and fertilizer put on as quick as you can. If something happens where it's going to sit for a long period of time, remember that there's a lot of salt in fertilizer, and it'll affect the germination of the seed. So the longer it sits, you know, in the floater, especially if we get a rain event and it has to sit for 3 or 4 days, your germination on that seed can and probably will be affected. Another thing with fertilizer is something you might look at doing is splitting your fertilizer application, and I guess what I mean there is maybe putting some fertilizer on in the spring here as you're seeding, and then let's see how the crop develops and then go back in a little bit later and top dress. And there's definitely several different options for top dressing. And then you're kind of spending money as the year goes, and you're not putting it all in expecting, you know, everything to work out right. If you do get good germination and the crop is growing good, then maybe there might be worthwhile spending more money on it. So that might be an option to look at as well. With a lot of the fields, we're usually faced with high residue right now, and with the high residue in the broadcast seeding, your chances of good seed-soil contact is less because of that. And you know, if it's possible, try to remove the trash. You know, and if you can go out there and cultivate, you probably would be out there air seeding. So usually cultivating or harrowing isn't an option, and so I guess we might see some of these fields being burnt to get rid of some of that trash, especially in heavy trash fields. I've been in a few fields where some of the oat crops last year were fairly heavy, and there's lots of trash, and that might be an option that you might have to look at to get at some of these fields. And just a slide saying, you know, I guess not all crops or not all, I guess they can be broadcasted, but I don't think it works at all times to broadcast all crops. You know, there are producers that have got sunflowers to grow or to plant, and we still have time, I think, for them. But you know, you want anything that needs a strong root to hold the plant up is probably something you don't want to look at broadcasting. And when you look at sunflowers, when they get the large heads and the big stems, any type of wind, if you don't get a good root system, any type of wind will usually knock them over. Cereal crops as well, you know, if they're broadcasted, again, if they don't get a good root development, we could see a lot of lodging later on. And with, I have had a question or two about soybeans and peas, and you know, again, one thing to watch there is seed inoculant is probably not going to be used to its full benefit if it's sitting on the soil surface instead of in moist soil, so you're probably not going to get full advantage there. I think in most cases, producers that are going to be broadcasting are going to be looking at canola, and I think that's the big one that's proven in the past that we can do it, and actually as you know, we've had some really decent crops of it. So I think with the canola, there's definitely history there where we can make that work. And I guess the last thing with broadcasting regarding your crop insurance, whether it's done by ground rig or air, the crop has to establish a sufficient stand to at least, you know, a sufficient stand to produce a crop before you would be able to get coverage. And probably if you're going to go through the expense of broadcasting, it might not hurt just to give the MASC office a call and just to make sure of what needs to be done to make sure that you still would have coverage, and what you have to, I guess, have or develop in your field before that they will give you coverage. So it wouldn't be a bad phone call to make, just to make sure that you've got all your bases covered, because it is a fairly expensive venture, and if you go in there and land up not having any insurance, it could be a bad investment. So that would be another thing just to watch for when you're going out to broadcast. So with that, Linda, I don't know if there's any questions.
Lionel, yeah, just before you go on, Lionel, I have a couple here. The first one is, can you comment on the red winter wheat abandonment? How much in Westman is getting abandoned?
Regarding the winter wheat, it does vary from location to location. In Southwest here, there are, I would say, less than 10%. Most of the fields I've been in look like they're going to make it. I was in a field this week that you know, probably isn't going to make it. It's just the stand wasn't thick enough, wasn't enough plant population there. There are probably another couple fields that I've looked at that are borderline. So they're definitely, it hasn't been as good as winter for winter wheat. I understand the farther you go east, there is more fields that are being written off, and a lot more winter wheat that didn't make it through the winter. I think as you go farther north into that Hamiota, Minnedosa, Shoal Lake area, a lot of the winter wheat there was successful and making it through the winter, and a lot of those crops are doing fairly well right now. So I think there's a few in the southwest here, and then as you go east to the eastern side of the province, I think there's more fields being written off.
Okay.
Just one comment there. If you're planning on doing something, or if you have a field like that, it would be good to get in contact with crop insurance to get them to look at it fairly fast, especially if you're looking at reseeding. And I guess if you have wet conditions, just to discuss with them as to what your options are if you can't destroy the crop before the last of the seeding deadlines.
Thanks, Lionel. I also have another one here. You mentioned producers shifting out of soybeans. Is that also true for corn?
Yeah, it's with the corn. I think it's a growing crop in the southwest here. It's and I think what I'm seeing right now is the guys that are 4 and 5 year growers are still planting. The guys that are kind of, last year was their first year, they're looking at backing away from it and now looking more at cereal crops. The guys that need it for feed are still wanting to get it in and still going to be planting silage. So the silage guys, or the cattle producers, are still planting it. The 1-2 year growers are the guys that are looking at backing away. And I think a lot of the issue there is just it's getting later in the year, and producers are starting to worry about the fall and the whole issue with harvest. And some of the guys that are the seasoned growers are established for drying and have got a process, so they're still going out and doing it. The guys that don't have that process developed yet are the guys that are looking at growing something else.
Thanks, Lionel. That's all the questions I have right now. So John, go ahead whenever you're ready. Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Linda. Yep.
Yeah, okay, go ahead whenever you're ready.
We're set to go. Okay, great. Okay, what I'd like to do today is actually give a bit of an introduction on Swede Midge. First of all, just to set what my goals are for the presentation. Swede Midge is a relatively new insect in Manitoba and in Western Canada. So far, we haven't had economical problems. Ontario has had some bad issues both in coal crops and in canola. So my goal really with the presentation is to give you an introduction to what is Swede Midge, what does it do to plants, and what is the risk of Swede Midge in canola, and maybe a little bit about how our situation might be different than Ontario. So a few things just regarding Swede Midge and what you should be looking for. First of all, Swede Midge is a fly, and the picture on the screen on the left, it shows a fairly large insect on the screen, but do realize this insect is only a few millimeters big. They're smaller than a mosquito. They're mosquito-like in appearance, but smaller. Long dangly legs. Now, the other thing I should caution you about, in a canola field, in pretty much any field, you will see flies that are mosquito-like but smaller, long legs. There's a group of flies called fungus gnats that could easily be confused with Swede Midge, and there's other types of midge flies as well. So if you do see some flies that seem to match this general image, don't assume right away it's Swede Midge. If you're concerned, you could send some in. We actually have to look at the antenna to tell if it's a Swede Midge or not. There's a certain antennal structure. So they are difficult to tell for sure. The larvae are actually what caused the problem. So the picture on the right, you can see a few things that look like almost little rice grains on this canola flower. So the very small larvae. What the problem is really, the way these larvae feed is they secrete a substance onto the plant that kind of breaks down the cell walls, and then they kind of suck up the juice. It's that secretion that causes the problems. It makes the plant grow in distorted, twisted ways, and it's that distortion of the plant tissue that really is the problem. So just to give you a bit of a background, what's happened in the past with Swede midge, until about the mid-90s, as far as we know, it wasn't in Canada. At about 1996 in Ontario, the people who were growing crops like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage started to notice that a lot of their plants were quite misshapen and really unmarketable. In some cases, there were quite big yield losses because of this. At the time, they thought it was a nutrient deficiency. And that line of thinking seemed to persist for a few years till about 2000 when an entomologist at the University of Guelph identified Swede midge on these plants. The next year they did a more formal survey looking for this insect, and they found that 9 counties in Ontario and 1 county in Quebec had Swede midge in their co-crops. In the following year, it was considered a quarantine pest in Canada. And in 2003, a colleague in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon noticed that what she described as jumping cecid larvae, cecid refers to the family that these fly larvae belong to. So she noticed some of these jumping little larvae in canola pods. The larvae that I showed earlier, they have this characteristic when they're disturbed, even though they don't have legs, they kind of spring from the plant. So there's a good chance that these jumping larvae that were described were probably Swede midge. So this was back in 2003. More formal surveys were done, and by 2007 it was confirmed that Swede midge was present in Saskatchewan and had spread east in Canada. Traps went up in Manitoba. In 2008 we had our first confirmation of Swede midge in Manitoba, but that year only 2 Swede midge were found in total in the traps, 1 in a canola field near Glenlee and 1 in a broccoli field near Portage de la Prairie. The fact that 2 were found means it's here, but at what level we really don't know. In Manitoba, we've been setting up traps the last 2 years. Last year I did find some Swede midge, but again, very low levels. And we haven't been noticing damage symptoms on canola plants. And I'll show you those symptoms a bit later. In Saskatchewan, in 2012, they first started noticing fields where you could walk in and, without too much looking, see Swede midge damage to canola. Again, most of these cases probably not economical, but damage getting visible. So that's the situation we've been at in Western Canada. A bit of background on the midge. It comes from Eurasia, where it's a problem on crucifer crops, not really considered a canola pest over there, though. They do like temperatures in the low 20s, ideally, and I'll stress they do like adequate rainfall. They don't do well under drier conditions, hence they're probably a bigger threat in southern Ontario. In 2006, scientists at Ag Canada and Saskatoon mapped out what they predicted would be the distribution and the, I guess, the risk of Swede midge across Canada. And on the map, anything in red, so mainly southern Ontario, these are areas where Swede midge is at a higher risk of becoming a more chronic problem. Moister area has the right temperature conditions, so southern Ontario is very favorable for Swede midge. And in fact, most of southern Ontario, southern Quebec, and the Maritimes are quite favorable for midge development. The prairies, and including southern Manitoba, is what we call suitable, meaning Swede midge can probably survive here. There may be years where it does better, but it's certainly not as ideal an environment as Southern Ontario would be. So now that it's here, it will probably establish, it'll probably be present. How bad it's going to get, though, remains to be seen. It's hard to say whether we'll get the same problems that Southern Ontario has had. So I've already mentioned about the adult midge. They're mosquito-like, very similar in color to a mosquito, but again, much smaller, so quite small, delicate flies. And this picture here shows what it would look like under a 10-time hand lens. You can kind of see the almost bead-like antenna on it, which again is a distinctive thing, but they are quite small. So here's a bit of the life cycle of Swede midge. Right now, they would be in the soil as a pupa. That's how they overwinter. They will be probably emerging. I'm going to guess by next week we will probably see Swede midge emerging in Manitoba and Saskatchewan based on degree day models that we've been using. So they'll be starting to emerge pretty soon. But what happens when they start emerging as adults? They don't all come out at once. At least in Ontario, they did a study and found that there was almost 3 very distinct peaks of emergence. So you'll get a batch of them emerging maybe in early June, then another batch emerging a little bit later in June, and then maybe near the end of the month, a 3rd batch emerging. This makes it very tricky because for people who are growing co-crops like your cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, trying to time controls becomes very difficult. And they've got a very quick life cycle. As an adult, they only live for 1 to 3 days. They lay their eggs, and depending on the temperature, those eggs can hatch in 1 to 10 days. Then you get the larva, which will feed anywhere from about a week to 3 weeks, depending again on the temperature. And they turn to pupa, and the cycle continues. And in Ontario and Quebec, they found that there are 4 to 5 generations. In the prairies, we don't know. There's somebody who is starting to study Swede midge in Saskatoon, but right now there's a lot of questions that we just don't know about the prairie population. So because of these multiple generations, at any given time from June through to September, you could have almost any stage of Swede midge present, which does make it very difficult for people who are trying to manage Swede midge. So again, here's some pictures of the larva, very tiny, whitish larva. And again, when you disturb them, you would notice this funny behavior where they almost jump off of the canola flowers. Again, when they feed, they're releasing this secretion. With the canola flowers, one thing that you would note is the flower will often not open. It becomes almost bottle-shaped, and the flower will essentially die on the plant as a closed flower, not really open up properly. And the other thing, too, I'll just point out, often when you find one, you find several in a flower. The eggs are usually laid in clusters, so you very rarely will find just one in a flower or in a new growth of a plant. Usually it's a few of them that you would find. Here's the pupa, magnified. That's how they're overwintering right now. So the damage can really take on several forms because, again, it depends how the plant responds to these secretions. Sometimes you get swollen, distorted, or twisted shoots of the plants. Premature bolting can occur. The swollen and closed buds, again, the flowers just aren't opening up. They can be bottle-shaped. One thing that can happen is this effect where you get multiple branching, and another effect is where the pods are very close together. The pods almost look like they've been scrunched into a very small area, and they tend to call this the witch's broom effect. And I'll show a picture of that in just a moment. So in the flowers, again, they'll be in there feeding. The flower will stay closed, not open up, and essentially the flower dies, and you will get a stub instead of a pod on the stem. So here's the flowers again. They remain closed, kind of bottle-shaped, closed, dying, not really opening up. Now, if you see this, don't automatically suspect Swede midge. Open up a few, try to find some midge larvae. Other things can cause this to happen. So again, don't just automatically note that there were some flowers that didn't open and died and call it Swede midge. other things will cause similar symptoms. So here's what I refer to as the stub. So normally these would be pods. They're not. These are just little stubs where no pod will develop. Now, once again, other things can cause this. Lygus bug can cause this effect when they feed on flowers and the flowers end up dying. Diamondback moth, when they're feeding in flowers, can cause the same effect. Heat blasting. If we get 30-degree weather when the canola is flowering, the flowers die and you get these stubs. So a lot of things can cause them. So we really encourage people, look for the larvae. Don't just see things like this and make the assumption we've had Swede midge. So this is a couple canola plants from New Liskeard, Ontario, an area that was hit very hard last year. And news of this really has caused a lot of concern over Swede midge. This area around New Liskeard had some very dramatic yield reductions because of Swede midge. You can see on this plant here, very little flowers that are going to open and mature into pods, so very severe yield reduction. So Ontario was hit quite hard in the canola crop, but again, whether things line up and we experience any similar yield losses, it's just too hard to say right now. So in canola, here's that witch's broom effect again. The pods are very close together, kind of all scrunched together in the upper part of the plant. My colleague in Saskatoon who sent me this slide, which is actually photographed from a Swede midge manual, wanted to include the warning that other factors can cause similar damage. So once again, do not assume, because, oh yeah, I've seen that before, that you've had Swede midge. Other things can cause these symptoms. And we really do stress, look for the larva in the flowers or on the plant. Or if you think you might have adults, send us a sample. I'm going to have to go, here we go. Other things can cause a lot of similar symptoms. Here's a very distorted, twisted plant. This is kind of severe Swede midge damage. They've done a lot of feeding on the upper part of the plant, and it's just grown very twisted. Now, one of the things that makes canola susceptible to Swede midge is the staging. And as a general guideline, the earlier seeded canola will likely have a better chance of escaping Swede midge. Later seeded canola might be a bit more vulnerable. A study they did in Ontario, they found that canola was vulnerable to damage by Swede midge at bud formation, and also when you had secondary and tertiary buds developing in the leaf axils. But once the canola was fully flowered, the canola was safe from economic damage by Swede midge. So Manitoba, if we're seeding canola in April, early May, we probably would be escaping Swede midge damage, I would suspect, unless we get some really cool weather that keeps the canola held back. This year, I know people are seeding late. I would say maybe be looking for Swede midge, but again, don't be overly panicky or too concerned. Again, our populations here don't seem to be great. We did have trouble catching them in our sticky traps last year. We know they're here, but at low levels, so something to watch for. But even though you've got some later seeded canola this year, I still don't think our risk is going to be all that high in Manitoba, but it will be interesting to see what the population does here and how it does build. Saskatchewan, up in that Carrot River area, they've got some levels that seemed a little bit higher, so that's an area where I know they'll be watching things this year. And we're going to be having a series of sticky traps out trying to collect Swede midge, just so we have a handle on what the populations are doing in Manitoba. So myself and a few cooperators, we're putting out pheromone-baited sticky traps. So basically, a lure gets put in the trap. The lure will emit a smell which will be very attractive to the male Swede midge. It's the same smell the females release at mating time, so it's drawing the male midge to the traps. And they get drawn in, stuck to the bottom, and weekly we change the inserts. And the linings will be sent away to a lab in Saskatoon where they'll be evaluated for Swede midge. It's a lot of work because it is something you have to do under a microscope, and you get a lot of other insects and debris on these traps, so it's a lot of finicky work. So luckily, a technician in Saskatoon has volunteered to do a lot of our liner assessments. So we will be doing that and just trying to get a handle on what the Swede midge levels are like in Manitoba. One thing I would encourage growers and agronomists to do is if by chance you think you have a field that has Swede midge, especially if you are seeing the little larvae in the flowers, give me a call or give a farm production advisor in your area a call. Let them know. It would be good for us to be aware of fields and areas where there is some Swede midge starting to show up. If we start seeing higher levels, we'll have to start looking at developing some control guidelines. Right now, we don't have much that we can provide for you as far as control guidelines. There are a couple chemicals registered for Swede midge, which horticulture growers will spray multiple times in a season to keep the Swede midge levels low enough that it's non-significant. In canola, that's not economical. Trying to control them with a one-time spray is not likely to be too successful. And right now, we wouldn't have a really great idea how to even time a spray. So at this point, there's probably not much you could be doing. So at this point, I would say just something to be looking for, but not overly concerned about. So maybe I'll end with that. And Linda and Lionel, if there's any questions, I can either take them now or at the end of the presentation.
John, just a comment that we do have a number of participants from Saskatchewan, so you did mention the one area, but have they been found in other areas in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, actually they're quite widespread in Saskatchewan. My guess is probably most of the canola growing area has Swede midge. Carrot River area seems to be the hot spot. The area more or less to the east of Saskatoon seems to be a hot spot. But they have found them in traps further south and west as well. So they're there. Most of Saskatchewan is probably more similar to Manitoba, again with that exception in the northeast.
Okay, thank you. Also a comment, do you have any comments on the cabbage seed pod weevil?
Yeah, cabbage seed pod weevil. So this time we're talking about a beetle, not a fly. And the problem with cabbage seed pod weevil is they lay their eggs right into the pods, and you get larvae developing right in the pods. There's a survey that people have been doing for quite some time now, at least a good decade, where they've been following the movement of cabbage seed pod weevil. Initially, it was an Alberta problem. Then it spread to Saskatchewan, and it's been moving through Saskatchewan. It's within about 2 municipalities of the Manitoba border now. In those areas, the population is really low, but it's been found, again, within a couple municipalities. We'll be looking for it this year, but so far it has not been found in Manitoba. So as far as we know, we're seed pod weevil free. I don't expect that to continue for long, though, just because it is so close. I'm expecting that within the next couple of years, we'll probably find it in western Manitoba. For people who do have cabbage seed pod weevil concerns, I would say be sweeping your canola as it gets into that bud and early flowering stage. If you are finding a lot of them, there are economic thresholds that you can use. The spraying, unfortunately, does need to be done as you get into those early flowering stages. So that'd be a whole other talk, I guess, but there are control strategies that can be used for it.
Thank you, John. I don't have any other questions. Lionel, did you have anything?
Actually, I think John covered, I had a few, but he went through them and covered them all. So thanks again, John. That was interesting information from a topic that's been in the paper lately. So I just wanted to get you to address it. So thanks again. It was well done.
You're welcome.
I guess, Linda, what we'll do now is turn it over to Brad. And Brad is from FMC, and he's going to give us an update on authority.
Brad, whenever you're ready, go ahead. Hello, Brad, are you there?
Oh, here. How's that?
That's excellent. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess I was muted. Okay, so we'll rock and roll here. Thanks everybody for joining. As you may have heard, Authority has been now registered in Western Canada on soybeans, and so I'm here today to just give a brief update on what Authority is and what it can provide soybean growers. It's been around for 3 years now, registered in flax, peas, chickpeas, and sunflowers, and in those crops, it's really helping growers with certain weed issues like cleavers and kochia. In soybeans, it's a little bit different fit because of the risk of glyphosate resistance and just the number of applications of glyphosate we're doing. This can help reduce that for certain weed populations. So, I'm with FMC, the name of the company that owns the sulfentrazone or the Authority brand, and I'll continue on here.
Bottom left-hand corner. There you go.
So, yeah, sorry, yeah, I got it. No, it's just delayed. So Authority Charge and Authority are the two products that I'll talk about. Authority is essentially sulfentrazone alone, and Authority Charge has another component in the case. It's a tank mix of Authority and AIM. So why is this important and a topic we need to discuss? Group 9 resistance or glyphosate resistance is spreading. In the U.S., it's, I mean, there's 6 or 7 different species they have issues with. I'll talk a little bit about that coming up. In Manitoba, we've now identified kochia as a resistant species to glyphosate. Saskatchewan and Alberta had in previous years already identified that as an issue. And it's something that's a little bit of a warning for us that these weeds are on the move. Weeds are adapting to glyphosate based on the number of applications of glyphosate we're doing, and we need to change the way we think about glyphosate and how much we use it going forward so we can help prevent resistance. How does Authority work? If people haven't used it or heard of it, it's a pre-residual product. So essentially what we're doing is we're spraying Authority on top of the surface of the soil with a rainfall activation. And an activation is kind of a misleading term, but essentially what it is it's getting into solution so that the germinating weed seeds on the top layer of soil will take the product up with the moisture that they're imbibing, or as the radicle emerges from the seed, takes up that moisture and takes up the product, and it kills it at that time. So it's creating a chemical barrier on top, and it's important to think of that as a barrier. We don't want to break that barrier, so it is best to spray after planting. It is okay to spray before, and probably right now in Western Canada it's about a 50-50 split on the other crops, growers spraying before and after. But just to minimize the risk of breaking that barrier and having weeds growing through a split where their product has moved because of separation or that seeding pass, spraying after is best. As mentioned, rainfall activation, about 10 millimeters is what's required. Essentially think of it as the moisture of the rainfall comes to germinate those small broadleaf weed seeds in the top layer of soil. That's where we need to be, think of it, they need that moisture to germinate, we need the moisture to be taken up by those weed seeds. So it's mostly uptake through the roots, prevents emergence prior to, by controlling those weeds at germination. And it can also suppress growth of emerged weeds. You'll see some symptomology, water-soaked lesions on the small broadleaf weeds that do emerge if they've missed that uptake of product at time of germination. So why would a grower use Authority? Why is why are growers thinking about this? I know there's some that are going to be using it this year. Control of tough weeds. If you've got kochia, if you've got red root pigweed, lamb's quarters as well as a flushing weed, or cleavers where you're growing soybeans. These are flushing weeds that really, multiple applications of glyphosate, it's hard to keep up with. When you're spraying other crops in crop during that time, it can be tough to keep up with. So this is a great base option for those weeds, and it does a very good job at controlling. And we're talking long-term residual, like 6 to 8 weeks, and even season-long, depending on conditions. Resistant stewardship, as mentioned, it's a group 14. As mentioned, glyphosate resistance is a major concern. We need to be thinking about 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, and being able to continue to use glyphosate the way that we do right now we're going to need to utilize other tools, and Authority is a fantastic example of that. Early weed removal, research has shown, and I'll show a couple slides here, that fields are clean from the start. They'll yield 10 to 15% higher. It's no surprise, I guess, that if you have a lot of weed competition when the crop is young, you're going to lose yield, and soybeans is no different. And it's a time savings. I mean, we're all in a time crunch when it comes to right now seeding, and that may be a little bit of a deterrent to using a product like Authority, but if you think of all the seeding that's happening together now because of the condensed season, that's going to also condense spray applications later on, and this can help to reduce those number of applications required in crop. Here's a picture showing the level of kochia control. So on the left side here, over here where it's treated with Authority, you see no kochia, and over here on the right side, the level of pressure that is in that field. And that is one thing that this product is known for, especially kochia control. It is very, very good on kochia. It's the level of the dose response curve. If you were to rank all the different weeds that Authority controls, kochia is very, very, it is at the top of that list. It's very good on kochia. Red root pigweed here and some flax. You can see the difference between treated and untreated. Again, left untreated and right to having the Authority down. Growers of flax who've tried it will see that it's a very helpful product for them. And here in flax, again on cleavers. So if you're growing soybeans in an area that cleavers are an issue, Authority is a very good fit too. And just some data showing the difference here with kochia control. You know, you can see 65 days after application, 5 trials, we're up at 95% control. Red root pigweed, 90% control, 65 days after application. And again, cleavers here, 53 days up at 94% control with just Authority. Other reasons to use, as mentioned, resistant stewardship, good on red root pigweed, good on lamb's quarters, cleavers, kochia, wild buckwheat. All 5 of those weeds have some level of resistance already in Western Canada. We have kochia there, as mentioned, with glyphosate resistance confirmed. It's been talked about that in the grassland region of Western Canada, the next weeds that we need to be concerned about are green foxtail and wild oat for glyphosate resistance. I can tell you, and I probably don't need to say this, but those are a major concern for Western Canadian agriculture. Those are major weeds across the prairies, and we need to be cognizant of overusing glyphosate and not utilizing other modes of action to help prevent resistance. In the parkland region, cleavers is another one that they've identified as a concern going forward, and that's Ewankiw, who's with Ag Canada, who's doing that work and modeling the potential for glyphosate resistance in other species going forward. It happens fast. It wasn't that many years ago in the U.S. that it was sort of talked about that glyphosate resistance wasn't a concern. The mode of action, the way it works on the plants, it wasn't the same as Group 2s. It wasn't the same as Group 1s or Group 5s where we had to be concerned about resistance. And you can see with the onset of Roundup-ready crops in the U.S., corn and soybeans, multiple applications of glyphosate only per year and year after year, how quickly things can happen. And in 10 years, it's gone from the top left here with 1 species confirmed in 8 or 9 states to 2012, where now we're into the Canadian provinces with certain species, and some of these red and pink states down here, we're talking 6 or 7 different weed species that have confirmed resistance to glyphosate. So this is not to scare people, but it's reality. This is what happens when we overuse a molecule, and something so important to crop production like glyphosate, we need to be very cognizant of how we go forward with it. Closer to home here in Manitoba, you can see North Dakota, the species that they have confirmed kochia. Water hemp, tall or common water hemp, is a pigweed species, similar as a seedling to red root pigweed. Very hard to differentiate between the two, but as it grows up into an adult weed, it is very different. Has male and female plants, so cross-pollination between those male and female plants, and pollen movement means that it does spread quickly, and that's why it has moved its way into states like North and South Dakota. Common ragweed as well is identified in North Dakota. South Dakota has Canada fleabane as well, a weed that is in Manitoba. Spreads very quickly because they're airborne seeds, and needs to be a concern for us, and thinking about how we're controlling it with just glyphosate. And in Minnesota as well, they have giant ragweed resistance too. So other reasons, it's not just about glyphosate resistance concerns, it's also about maximizing returns. And as mentioned before, you use a pre-herbicide like Authority, you're going to increase yields on average over time with different weed pressures. Here's a slide showing that, where you have a pre going down, the Authority here at 47 bushels, and then as the application of glyphosate or control of those weeds is delayed, you're losing yield. So if the weeds were controlled at 0 to 4 inches, they lost 3 bushels. If the weeds were controlled at 4 to 8 inches, they lost 6 bushels. And with weather, it's and other crops needing to be sprayed, it's not always easy to get in at the optimal timing. So this just gives you that base of being able to control those weeds residually, and less reliance on glyphosate from resistance. Obviously, that's a huge thing. But if we can add yield and make this a short-term economical benefit as well as a long-term stewardship thing, obviously that's very good for growers taking it up and using the product. Again, another slide showing the same thing. And just to note here, this really shows the difference if you are seeding or planting soybeans with a planter and moving to 15 or 20-inch rows or 30-inch rows. That economical benefit is even much higher, because obviously there's less crop competition for those weeds that are growing in between the rows, and having that residual product down is going to give you a quicker benefit from an economic standpoint. So quickly, what is the difference between Authority and Authority Charge? There are 2 products on the market. Authority is straight sulfentrazone. It gives you that soil residual activity, group 14. It's a flowable herbicide. As mentioned before, extended residual control of those weed species, kochia, red root pigweed, lamb's quarters, wild buckwheat. Also effective on cleavers, smartweed, and other small-seeded broadleafs. It comes in a 4 by 3.79 meter case. Authority Charge is that same product, except we have another bottle in the case. The charge component, I guess, is AIM. And that's essentially used as a burn down additive. It's the active ingredient or the product that's sold as Clean Start by New Farm. So that comes in the case of Authority Charge, and that is the components there. You've got, as you can see in the photo, 2 gallon jugs of Authority and a 1.2 liter jug of the AIM that comes with it. Which one should you use? It all depends on whether you're doing a burn off or not. And AIM is used as a burn-off additive. That's what it is. Put it with the glyphosate. It speeds it up. It's a good resistance management tool or stewardship tool to just give that group 14 on the weeds that are there now, the emerged weeds that the glyphosate's killing. If you're not doing a burn-off, simple, don't use the AIM. Use the Authority straight. So that's an answer to that question. What rate to use? Well, in Roundup Ready soybeans, quite simply, I would say that the recommended rate most of the time is going to be 80 acres per case of Authority Charge, or 40 acres per jug of Authority. And that, we have a rate range on the label. It runs from 32 up to 43 acres per jug. And the rate range is there for soil type and weed species. We need to be going to higher rates, as mentioned here, for wild buckwheat. Cleavers is another weed that we like to see going to 32 acres per jug for extended control. In Roundup Ready soybeans, it's more simple because we are coming in, and we know we're coming in with that glyphosate, and we're using this as a base layer. But if you are looking for extended control, we need to be looking at the weed species and soil types, and that soil types comes in on organic matter. The higher the organic matter, and anywhere above 4% is where we want to see higher rates, around 32. pH is another factor. So if we're above 7.8 as a pH. Definitely come down to the low rate, 40 acres per jug, or even 43. And lighter soils, so sandy soils is where we'd like to see those lower rates of 40 to 43 acres per jug of authority. And you'll see good weed control, good long-term weed control in those soil types with the lower rate. When you get into those, pHs of 7 or 7.5, organic matter is above 4 as mentioned, or a medium to fine textured soils, we want to be moving to the higher rates to get extended weed control. Okay. Some questions that we get, comments I guess, are it's too expensive, and it runs between around $13, $14 to $19 per acre, depending on the rate and whether it's authority or authority charge. I can say though that we've had lots of comments from growers who've tried it and overwhelmingly happy with the product, the value that the product provides. It is a different type of product. It's a pre that you don't have to incorporate. It's a pre that needs very little moisture to activate, and overwhelmingly the results are very positive. After I've had comments, I didn't want to use it, I felt it was too expensive, but my agronomist talked me into it, and now I won't grow flax without it. I mean, flax is obviously a different story because of the lack of other products, and the efficacy of glyphosate in Roundup Ready soybeans is very, very strong still. However, we need to be thinking about, not only today, but 10 years down the road. What if I don't get any rain? It requires soil moisture to allow the plant uptake. As I mentioned before, 10 millimeters, quarter-inch of rain. Even where we have 7 days or 10 days of no rainfall after application, the product is still sitting there. It is not being volatilized off into the atmosphere. It doesn't get tied up on trash on top of the soil. Once we get that rainfall, it will wash down. You will see some potentially weeds emerging and germinating and emerging that we don't control because we don't have that rainfall. If those seeds are into moisture and do germinate, we'll miss those, but we'll pick up the next flush that comes when that rainfall comes. What can I grow next year? This spring actually was changed to 12-month recropping for canola. We've always had spring wheat, durum wheat, alfalfa, barley, and field corn on a 12-month recropping window. And just going further on that, we've always recommended a 12-month when asked directly on canola. We knew that was the case. We had a little bit of a hiccup with our initial label, and then we were able to get that changed with supporting data. So we've had no issues with canola being planted the year after an application of authority. 16 months for winter wheat, 24 months for lentils, sweet corn, and sorghum. So if you use authority this year, you can plant canola next year. Why aren't wild mustard and volunteer canola on the label? Well, it's not a consistent enough level of control, and when we talk about control with authority, we're talking 6 to 8 weeks, season long, looking to keep things clean. And on average, we're getting about 50% control of those two weeds with that time frame. It's not sufficient as a standalone treatment, and not sufficient enough to be on the label for control, but at 50% average, you're getting a lot of help from it in addition to the other weeds. And a tank mix of authority and imazethapyr or pursuit at 120 acres per jug has been submitted to the PMRA for residual control of those weeds and going down at time of planting. And here's a trial, and as mentioned, the average is more around 50% as opposed to the 67 here, but the data that we did submit showed 50% average with authority alone and a 90% level of control with the third rate of pursuit or imazethapyr added in. So a good mix if you're looking for specifically Roundup Ready glyphosate tolerant canola control. Of course, adding that into the tank is going to give you other benefits as well, and in addition to the authority. So in summary, quickly, as mentioned, it's registered in soybeans now. We've been waiting for this to really get the push on authority in soybeans. It's gone from, in the last 5 years, 500,000 acres of soybeans in the U.S. to probably over 12 million coming up this year. So growers have really, obviously for more imminent reasons of glyphosate resistance taken this on. We've got the opportunity now in Western Canada to utilize this tool now as opposed to when we have to, and you're going to get added benefits of early weed removal, increasing yields, time savings for in-crop sprays. As mentioned, growers overwhelmingly happy with the product, and one last time, let's prevent resistance onset before it comes, and try reducing reliance on glyphosate alone, utilizing tools like Authority as well as other integrated pest management things like tillage and crop rotations. So with that, I'm finished, and I can take any questions that might be there, Linda. Thank you.
Yes, Brad, I do have one. Using Authority in crop would still allow planting of canola the following spring, even though not a full 12-month difference.
Great question. So this, as mentioned, it's a pre-product only. So what we're doing is we have to get this product on, and our label states that it's 3 days post-planting at the latest. It's a pre-plant or pre-emergent product. It cannot go on after the soybeans have emerged. And so when we say 12 months, essentially we're saying 1 year. If you planted your soybeans May 15th this year, or June 1st, let's say, and next spring, you're in planting your canola at the beginning of May, that's fine. We're talking about the following year because this is a pre-herbicide. It's stated as 12 months as opposed to, say, 10 for a post-emergent herbicide in other crops. Good question.
Good. Thank you, Brad. That's all the questions I have right now. Lionel, did you have any?
Actually, no, I think you covered everything pretty good there, Brad. I think most of the questions regarding Authority were there, and so thanks again for the presentation, and I'm sure there's a lot of producers looking at Authority right now. Okay.
If anybody has any questions, my number is 204-771-2903, or contact Lionel or the folks with Manitoba Ag, and they can get a hold of me if you have any further questions. Thanks again.
You bet, Brad. If anybody has any questions, they can get a hold of us, and we'll definitely forward them on to you. Thanks again. I mentioned this at the beginning. There's a few important seeding deadlines coming up. Corn and soybeans are May the 30th. And for the eastern side of the province, some of those dates might be a little bit different than the western side here. So we're getting close. Better be checking with MASC if you're still considering these crops or are looking at changing them. Just give them a call just to make sure you have the right dates. And again, if you've got questions or if you have ideas or information you'd like us to use or bring up at the webinars, get a hold of myself or Linda. There's our contact information. There's also the contact information for getting your credits for watching the webinars. Again, the list of the farm production advisors in the Southwest. And as scouting around, you can definitely see that we see a lot of different things out there. And Elmer seen this last week while he was out crop scouting, so hopefully he wasn't too close. The picture sure looks close. And there's a list of the Manitoba crops team. So if you've got questions regarding anything to do with crops, get a hold of any of these people. And if they're not able to give you the answer, they probably know the people or the contacts that they can find the information for you. And join us on June the 4th for the next Crop Talk. And I have to put that one in. See you next week.